The most dangerous mistake an officer can make is believing a uniform tells the whole story. The afternoon traffic moved steadily beneath a pale autumn sky as commuters filled the streets surrounding downtown Arlington. Office workers hurried toward parking garages. Food carts served late lunches to federal employees. Tourists wandered between historic monuments with cameras hanging from their necks. Nothing about the day suggested that anyone would remember it. At precisely 2:17 p.m., a dark gray sedan eased to a stop at a red light less than 3 miles from the Pentagon. Inside the vehicle sat General Marcus Johnson, dressed in a Navy sport coat over a simple gray shirt. He looked nothing like the decorated 4-star officer whose decisions shaped military operations across multiple commands. His service ribbons were absent. His insignia remained locked inside a secure briefcase resting behind the driver's seat. To everyone around him, he appeared to be nothing more than another middle-aged black man driving home after work. His expression remained calm as the traffic signal changed. He accelerated slowly. Less than 30 seconds later, flashing red and blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Marcus glanced toward the mirror before signaling and pulling smoothly onto the shoulder. He shut off the engine, rolled down the driver's window, placed both hands calmly on the steering wheel. He had performed the same sequence countless times throughout his military career, not because he expected trouble, but because discipline became instinct after decades of service. A white patrol SUV stopped behind him. Officer Ethan Walker stepped out first. Young, confident. His mirrored sunglasses reflected the afternoon sunlight as he approached the driver's side. Another white officer, Ryan Collins, exited the passenger side and positioned himself several feet behind the sedan, watching every movement inside the vehicle. Walker stopped beside the open window. "Good afternoon, sir. License and registration." Marcus nodded politely. "Certainly, officer." His voice remained measured. No irritation. No anxiety. Only quiet cooperation. Walker studied him for a moment before accepting the documents. "You know why I stopped you?" "No, sir." "You drifted across the lane divider." Marcus thought briefly. "I wasn't aware of that." Walker looked down at the license before looking back into the car. "Where are you headed today?" "Home." "Coming from work?" "Yes." "What kind of work?" Marcus met the officer's eyes. "I work for the federal government." The answer was truthful. It simply wasn't complete. Walker waited another second. "What agency?" Marcus smiled politely. "I'm afraid I can't discuss today's assignment." The silence that followed lasted only 2 seconds. Yet something inside Officer Walker shifted. His posture stiffened. His expression narrowed. Officer Collins quietly stepped closer. Walker handed the license back only halfway before stopping. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus remained still. "May I ask why?" "I asked you to step out." Without hesitation, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and exited the sedan exactly as instructed. He kept his hands visible, his movements slow, his voice respectful. Pedestrians passing nearby slowed almost instinctively. A woman walking her dog paused across the street. 2 construction workers looked up from their equipment. No one knew why the traffic stop suddenly felt different. Walker gestured toward the rear of the vehicle. "Anything illegal inside?" "No." "Weapons?" Marcus answered carefully. "Nothing unlawful." Walker exchanged a glance with Collins. "That's not what I asked." Marcus didn't argue. "There is secured government property inside the vehicle." Those 6 words changed everything. Collins immediately reached for his radio. Walker took one deliberate step closer. "What kind of government property?" "I'm not authorized to discuss it outside proper channels." The answer, calm as it was, only deepened the officer's suspicion. To them, every response sounded rehearsed. Every pause sounded evasive. Every refusal sounded like concealment. Walker looked toward Collins once more. "We're going to secure the vehicle." Marcus nodded once. "I understand." He offered no resistance. No raised voice. No demand for special treatment. Only patience. As Collins moved toward the sedan, Walker instructed Marcus to place his hands behind his back while the vehicle was searched for officer safety. Several bystanders quietly lifted their phones. A military shuttle bus slowed as it passed. Inside, a handful of uniformed service members glanced toward the roadside before disappearing into traffic. Marcus stood motionless. Steel handcuffs clicked around his wrists with a sound that echoed far louder than the busy street around them. He lowered his eyes briefly before looking back toward the officers. Then, in the same calm voice he had used since the stop began, he spoke a single sentence. "I sincerely hope," he said, "that every decision made today is documented exactly as it happens." Neither officer understood why those words mattered. Not yet. The sound of the handcuffs lingered long after the patrol car doors closed. Officer Ethan Walker pulled away from the shoulder with steady confidence, the flashing lights fading into ordinary traffic as if nothing unusual had happened. General Marcus Johnson sat quietly in the back seat, his wrists secured in front of him, his expression unchanged. Through the reinforced divider, he watched the streets of Arlington pass by with the same calm attention he had once reserved for military briefings. Years of command had taught him that panic rarely improved any situation. Observation did. Officer Ryan Collins followed behind in the second patrol vehicle, updating dispatch over the radio. One adult male in custody, transporting to Central Precinct for further investigation. Dispatch acknowledged without hesitation. Nothing about the transmission suggested that history had just begun recording itself. Inside the patrol car, Ethan glanced into the rearview mirror. "You've been unusually cooperative." Marcus looked up. "I've always believed cooperation and accountability should exist together." Ethan gave a slight shrug. "Then today should go smoothly." Marcus didn't answer. Several minutes later, the patrol cars rolled into the secured parking area behind the station. Afternoon sunlight reflected against the brick building as officers entered and exited through the rear security door. It looked like any other police station in America, busy, organized, and entirely routine. Marcus was escorted inside. A civilian clerk briefly looked up before returning to her computer. Two detectives walked past carrying case files. Someone laughed near the break room. The ordinary rhythm of professional life continued without interruption. Officer Walker removed the handcuffs long enough for standard booking procedures before replacing them with temporary restraints attached to the processing counter. Name: Marcus Elijah Johnson. Occupation: Marcus answered exactly as he had on the roadside. Federal employee. Walker looked up from the keyboard. "That's pretty broad." "It is. You want to be more specific?" "I'm not able to." Walker sighed quietly before continuing. "Employer?" "The United States government." The answer sounded almost rehearsed. Ryan leaned against the nearby counter. "You know, people usually become a lot more cooperative once they're inside the station." Marcus met his eyes. "I am cooperating. You're withholding information. I'm protecting information I'm legally obligated to protect." Neither officer found the distinction convincing. Walker entered the available information into the system. Within seconds, the first records appeared. Driver's license. Veteran status. No criminal history. No outstanding warrants. Nothing unusual. Then he searched federal employment verification. The screen paused. Loading. Searching. Finally, a short message appeared. Restricted employment record. Additional authorization required. Walker frowned. He tried again. The same message appeared. Ryan stepped closer. System problem? Maybe. He entered Marcus's full name once more. Again, the database returned almost nothing. No department. No position. No accessible personnel profile. Only another authorization restriction. Ryan folded his arms. Convenient. Marcus remained silent. Walker picked up the desk phone. "Let's verify through federal personnel." The call was routed through an automated directory. Then another. Then another. After nearly 4 minutes, a calm voice finally answered. "Federal Personnel Operations. This is Officer Ethan Walker with Arlington Police. We're attempting to verify federal employment for an individual identifying himself as Marcus Elijah Johnson." The representative requested the date of birth. Walker provided it. Silence followed. Longer than expected. The representative returned. "Please hold." The line transferred again. Walker exchanged a puzzled glance with Ryan. "This is taking longer than it should." Marcus lowered his eyes briefly but offered no explanation. Across the room, several officers continued typing reports, completely unaware that a routine verification request had just been redirected far beyond the office originally intended. On the phone, another unfamiliar voice answered. "Calm. Measured. Professional. This call has been transferred to the appropriate office." Walker straightened slightly. "I just need employment verification." There was a brief pause. Then the voice asked a single question. "Officer, is Mr. Marcus Johnson currently in your custody?" Officer Ethan Walker tightened his grip on the receiver. Yes, he answered carefully. Mr. Marcus Johnson is currently in our custody. The voice on the other end did not react immediately. There was no surprise, no frustration, only a measured silence that somehow felt heavier than any raised voice. Please remain on the line. Another transfer followed. Walker glanced toward Ryan Collins. I've never had a simple employment verification take this long. Ryan shrugged. Maybe he's exaggerating who he works for. Marcus remained seated at the processing counter, his hands still restrained, his posture perfectly straight. He neither interrupted nor attempted to explain. Years of military leadership had taught him that facts eventually arrived on their own schedule. Across the room, officers continued their afternoon routines. A detective collected evidence bags. A dispatcher updated incident logs. Someone poured another cup of coffee. The station sounded exactly as it always did. Normal. Until the phone rang again. A different voice answered. Older. Confident. This is the Department of Defense Operations Center. Walker straightened instinctively. I'm attempting to verify federal employment for Marcus Johnson. Hey. Brief pause followed. Officer Walker, before we continue, I need you to answer one question. I'm listening. Has Mr. Johnson been injured? Walker looked across the room. Marcus sat calmly without a single visible complaint. No. Has force been used beyond standard handcuffing procedures? No. Is he safe? Yes. Another pause. Thank you. Walker frowned. Can you verify his employment? I'm not authorized to discuss personnel details over this line. Walker's patience began to wear thin. Then who can? You'll receive further instructions. The line disconnected. Walker stared at the silent receiver. That's it. Ryan looked equally puzzled. They didn't verify anything? They asked if he was injured. Ryan laughed quietly. That's strange. Walker wasn't laughing. He looked back toward Marcus. You knew this would happen. Marcus met his eyes. I knew someone would answer. Walker folded his arms. You're making this unnecessarily complicated. Marcus spoke calmly. No, officer. The system is. Before Walker could respond, the dispatch supervisor stepped into the processing area. Ethan. What? I just received a call from communications. Walker turned. They want you to remain available. For what? They didn't say. Ryan looked toward the windows facing the parking lot. You think this has something to do with him? Before anyone could answer, the station's main telephone rang again. This time the dispatcher answered. Everyone nearby continued working. For several seconds. Then the dispatcher's expression changed. She slowly stood from her chair. I understand. Another pause. Yes, sir. She wrote something on a notepad before covering the receiver with one hand. Ethan. He walked over. What's going on? The caller requested your name. Walker frowned. My name. And Officer Collins. She lowered her voice. They also requested that no one release Mr. Johnson. Ryan's eyebrows lifted. Who called? The dispatcher glanced toward the phone before answering. I wasn't told. What exactly did they say? She looked at the handwritten note again. They said. Her voice became almost a whisper. Everyone involved in this stop should remain at the station until further notice. Silence spread through the room. The detective stopped talking. A civilian clerk slowly looked up from her computer. Even the coffee machine seemed louder than before. Walker turned toward Marcus. For the first time since the traffic stop began, he wasn't looking at a man whose story seemed incomplete. He was looking at someone whose story had just begun reaching people far above his own chain of command. Outside the station windows, a black government SUV quietly turned into the parking lot, followed by another vehicle with darkened windows. Neither one activated emergency lights. Neither one needed to. The two black SUVs rolled silently across the station parking lot. No flashing lights. No sirens. No dramatic entrance. Just quiet precision. Officer Ethan Walker watched through the front windows as both vehicles stopped near the employee entrance. Their windows were heavily tinted, hiding whoever sat inside. Neither driver stepped out immediately. Ryan Collins folded his arms. Federal investigators? Walker wasn't sure. They're here awfully fast. Inside the station, conversations became shorter. The dispatcher quietly adjusted her headset. A detective stopped halfway through reading a report. Even officers who knew nothing about the situation found themselves glancing toward the parking lot. Marcus Johnson remained exactly where he had been seated. Hands restrained. Back straight. Breathing slow. He showed no interest in the arriving vehicles. almost as though he had expected them long before anyone else. The front doors opened. 3 individuals entered. 2 wore dark business suits with government identification clipped discreetly to their belts. The third wore an olive-green military service uniform without unnecessary decorations. His calm expression attracted more attention than any rank insignia possibly could. None of them raised their voices. The senior civilian approached the front desk. "Good afternoon." His tone was courteous. "We're looking for the watch commander." Within seconds, Lieutenant Daniel Harris emerged from his office. "I'm Lieutenant Harris. How can I help you?" The visitor handed over a credential wallet. "My name is Robert Hayes." Harris examined the identification carefully before returning it. "What seems to be the issue?" Hayes spoke quietly enough that nearby civilians couldn't hear every word. "We've been informed that an individual named Marcus Johnson is currently being detained here." Harris nodded cautiously. "He's part of an ongoing investigation." "We understand." Hayes never argued. "We're not requesting his release." That answer surprised Harris. "Then what are you requesting?" "The preservation of every document associated with today's traffic stop," he continued calmly. "Body camera recordings, dash camera footage, dispatch audio, radio traffic, booking records, property inventory, officer notes, vehicle search documentation." Every item was listed without hesitation. Almost from memory, Lieutenant Harris felt the atmosphere around him becoming noticeably heavier. "May I ask why?" Hayes answered without emotion. "Because those records may become administratively significant." The words were carefully chosen. Not threatening, not accusatory, simply factual. The military officer standing beside him finally spoke. "General guidance has also been issued requesting that no electronic records related to today's incident be modified or deleted." Harris looked confused. "General guidance?" The officer nodded once. "Correct. Nothing more." No explanation followed. Across the room, Walker exchanged another uncertain glance with Ryan. Neither officer had ever witnessed outside officials arrive before an arrest report had even been completed. Lieutenant Harris led the visitors toward a conference room. Before entering, Hayes paused. "There is one additional request." Harris waited. "We ask that Mr. Johnson remain where he is. No further questioning. No additional interviews. No transport. No release." Harris frowned. "Until when?" Hayes looked directly at him. "Until the appropriate authority arrives." Those words echoed through the hallway long after the conference room door closed. Officer Walker slowly turned toward Marcus. For the first time, he noticed something he had completely overlooked during the traffic stop. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. The kind of quiet certainty possessed only by someone who understood exactly how the next chapter would unfold. Outside, another vehicle entered the parking lot. Unlike the first two, this one displayed a small Department of Defense parking permit behind its windshield. And this time, the passenger stepping out wore 4 silver stars on each shoulder. The station grew quieter with every passing minute. No one had ordered silence. It simply arrived on its own. Lieutenant Daniel Harris stepped out of the conference room first, followed by Robert Hayes and the military officer. Their conversation had ended without raised voices, yet every officer nearby sensed that the situation had changed. Hayes approached the processing area. "Mr. Johnson." Marcus looked up. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes." The greeting sounded less like strangers meeting and more like professionals acknowledging one another. Walker noticed it immediately. "You know each other?" Hayes answered before Marcus could. "We've worked together. Nothing more. No titles. No explanations." Hayes turned toward Lieutenant Harris. "May we confirm his identity?" Harris nodded. "As long as department procedures are followed." The military officer removed a sealed envelope from a leather portfolio and handed it across the counter. Inside was a government credential package bearing multiple security markings. Harris examined the documents carefully. His expression remained neutral for the first page. Then he turned another, and another. His eyes slowed. He looked back at Marcus, then once again at the papers. Walker tried reading the documents from several feet away, but could make out only official seals and signatures. "What is it?" Ryan whispered. Harris didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward Hayes. "I'll need to verify these." Of course. A secure phone was brought into the conference room. The verification call lasted less than 2 minutes. When Harris returned, something about his posture had changed. He walked directly toward Marcus. Without saying a word, he unlocked the temporary restraints securing him to the processing counter. The handcuffs themselves remained in place. Department policy still required authorization before removing them completely. Marcus stood slowly, still calm, still composed. Walker finally spoke. "Lieutenant, what's going on?" Harris looked at both officers. "The documents are authentic." Ryan frowned. "Authentic for what?" Harris chose his words carefully. "Mr. Johnson serves in a position requiring extraordinary federal protection." Walker waited. "That's not an answer." "No, it isn't." Before anyone could ask another question, the front entrance opened again. Every conversation inside the station stopped. An older officer in an impeccably pressed Army service uniform entered the lobby. For silver stars rested quietly on each shoulder. He wasn't surrounded by cameras. He wasn't followed by an entourage. He simply walked with the unmistakable confidence of someone who had spent decades carrying enormous responsibility. Every active duty service member in the building instinctively straightened. The general walked directly toward Marcus. The two men exchanged a brief nod. No salute. No embrace. Only mutual respect. The visiting general turned to Lieutenant Harris. "I appreciate your cooperation." Harris nodded respectfully. "Sir." Walker stared in disbelief. His eyes shifted from the four-star officer to Marcus. The realization still refused to settle. If a four-star general had personally come to the station, then who exactly had they arrested? The visiting general reached into his breast pocket and handed Harris a single folded document bearing the seal of the Department of Defense. Harris opened it. He read only the first paragraph before looking up, visibly stunned. Walker caught only one sentence near the top of the page. "Official directive from the Office of the Secretary of Defense." His heartbeat quickened. For the first time that afternoon, he understood that the traffic stop had never been an ordinary arrest. It had become a matter reaching the highest levels of the United States military. The room seemed to shrink as Lieutenant Harris lowered the document onto the conference table. No one spoke. Even the air conditioning sounded unusually loud. Officer Ethan Walker searched the faces around him, hoping someone would explain what he had just witnessed. Instead, he found only disciplined expressions and measured silence. The visiting four-star general stepped forward. "My name is General Thomas Reed." His voice carried neither anger nor superiority. It carried authority that required no introduction. He looked first at Marcus Johnson. "Marcus." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Sir." That single exchange erased every remaining doubt in the room. Walker stared at Marcus. You're military?" Marcus met his eyes with the same calm expression he had worn since the traffic stop. "I am." Walker shook his head. "Why didn't you tell us?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "Because you never asked who I was." The words landed harder than any accusation. "You asked where I worked. I answered truthfully. You asked whether I carried government property. I answered truthfully. You asked me to cooperate. I did." No one could dispute a single sentence. General Reed turned toward Lieutenant Harris. "May we proceed?" Harris nodded. "Yes, sir." Reed carefully unfolded the directive from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. This document authorizes the immediate confirmation of Mr. Johnson's identity. He looked around the room before continuing. General Marcus Elijah Johnson currently serves as a four-star general assigned to a strategic command reporting directly through the Department of Defense. The station fell completely silent. Ryan Collins blinked several times. Walker's face lost its color. The civilian clerk slowly lowered her pen. A detective quietly removed his reading glasses. General Reed continued. Due to the classified nature of General Johnson's responsibilities, portions of his personnel records are intentionally inaccessible through conventional federal verification systems. Everything suddenly made sense. The restricted database, the unanswered phone transfers, the immediate response from Washington, the arrival of defense officials. Marcus had never concealed his identity. The system itself had protected it. Walker looked toward the handcuffs still secured around Marcus's wrists. His voice became almost inaudible. "We arrested." General Reed answered gently. "You detained a four-star United States Army general." No one moved. No one attempted to justify what had happened. Marcus finally spoke. "I understand why the stop began." Every eye turned toward him. "The question is not whether officers should perform their duties." His voice remained composed. The question is whether assumptions replaced evidence. Walker lowered his eyes. For the first time that afternoon, he replayed every moment of the traffic stop. The repeated questions, the growing suspicion, the decision to search, the handcuffs. He realized none of those decisions had been based on discovering new facts. Each one had followed an assumption that the next answer must be hiding something. General Reed looked toward Lieutenant Harris. There is one remaining matter. Harris nodded. The restraints. Without another word, Harris stepped forward with the key. The steel cuffs unlocked with a quiet metallic click. Marcus slowly rubbed one wrist. Not because it hurt, but because freedom always feels different after unnecessary restraint. As the cuffs were placed on the processing counter, General Reed looked around the room. The Secretary of Defense has issued one additional instruction. Everyone waited. It concerns how this station will formally conclude today's incident. No one spoke after General Reed mentioned the Secretary of Defense. The silence itself became an order. Lieutenant Harris carefully folded the directive and returned it to its envelope. His years in law enforcement had taught him that official documents carried weight. But this one carried something else. Finality. He looked at General Reed. "What are your instructions, sir?" Reed answered without hesitation. "The Secretary has requested that today's incident conclude with the respect due to General Marcus Johnson's office." Walker swallowed. "What exactly does that mean?" General Reed turned toward him. "It means we acknowledge what has now been officially confirmed." His voice remained steady. Nothing more. Nothing less. Marcus stood quietly beside him. He showed no satisfaction, no triumph, no trace of resentment, only patience. General Reed continued. "General Johnson has not requested disciplinary action." Walker looked surprised. "He hasn't." Marcus answered himself. "No." Walker stared. "After everything that happened?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I've spent my career teaching leaders that mistakes become lessons only when people are willing to learn from them." The words settled over the room. No lecture. No condemnation, just quiet truth. General Reed stepped toward Lieutenant Harris. "The Secretary's final instruction is procedural." Harris listened carefully. "Upon formal confirmation of General Johnson's identity, military protocol recognizes the senior officer present." Walker frowned slightly, still trying to understand. General Reed continued. "That protocol includes rendering appropriate military courtesy." Across the room stood two National Guard liaison officers who had been assisting with an unrelated community program earlier that afternoon. The moment they heard the instruction, they instinctively straightened their uniforms. Without waiting for another command, both turned toward Marcus. Their right hands rose sharply. Perfect military salutes. Marcus returned the salute immediately. The exchange lasted only a few seconds. Yet the entire station watched in complete silence. Walker suddenly understood. The salute was never intended to embarrass anyone. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. Recognition that the man they had viewed only as a suspect had always carried responsibilities far beyond anything visible that afternoon. General Reed looked toward the officers gathered nearby. Civilian law enforcement personnel are not required to salute. His tone remained respectful. But professional respect belongs to everyone. Lieutenant Harris stepped forward first. He extended his hand. "General Johnson." Marcus accepted it. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I regret that today's encounter reached this point." Marcus answered honestly. "So do I." Walker hesitated for several seconds before approaching. His confidence from the roadside had completely disappeared. He removed his patrol cap and held it quietly at his side. "General." Marcus waited patiently. Walker struggled to find the words. "I judged the situation before I understood the person standing in front of me." Marcus looked directly into his eyes. "We all make decisions with incomplete information." Walker nodded. "But I also made assumptions." Marcus didn't disagree. Outside the station windows, the afternoon sun had begun dropping lower over the parking lot. Long shadows stretched across the pavement. The emergency lights that had flashed so confidently only hours earlier were now dark. General Reed quietly observed the exchange before speaking one final time. "Authority is measured by how we treat people whose authority we cannot yet see." No one argued, because everyone in that room now understood that uniforms could identify positions. But character revealed itself long before rank ever did. For several long moments, no one moved. The processing room that had been filled with commands only an hour earlier now felt almost reflective. Officer Ethan Walker stood quietly, his patrol cap still in his hands. He had spent years believing confidence came from making quick decisions. Now he wondered how many of those decisions had been shaped by conclusions reached too soon. General Marcus Johnson noticed the conflict on the young officer's face. Officer Walker. Walker looked up immediately. Yes, General. Marcus offered a calm smile. Walk with me. The request surprised everyone. Marcus wasn't asking for a private office. He wasn't requesting legal counsel. He simply began walking toward the front entrance, and Walker followed. The afternoon sunlight poured through the glass doors, casting long golden reflections across the polished floor. Outside, government vehicles remained parked in perfect order. Military personnel stood nearby, speaking quietly among themselves. Marcus stopped near the entrance. When I became a lieutenant, he began, my first commanding officer told me something I never forgot. Walker listened carefully. He said, every uniform hides a human story you haven't earned the right to judge. Marcus looked toward the parking lot. I've carried those words for more than 30 years. Walker lowered his eyes. I failed to do that today. Marcus nodded gently. You did. There was no anger in his voice. Only honesty. Walker took a slow breath. I kept thinking something didn't add up. Marcus answered. Sometimes things don't. But uncertainty isn't proof. Those words lingered. Walker replayed the traffic stop again. Marcus had remained respectful. Answered every question. Never resisted. Never raised his voice. The only thing that had seemed unusual was information the officers couldn't immediately verify. And somehow, that uncertainty had become suspicion. Marcus continued. You know what concerns me most? Walker expected criticism. Instead, Marcus said quietly, not that I was detained. Walker looked confused. It's that someone without my position might experience the same assumptions, without anyone arriving to verify who they are. The sentence struck harder than anything else Marcus had said. Walker suddenly realized this story was never truly about rank. The rank had simply exposed a much larger lesson. Behind them, General Reed watched silently. He made no effort to interrupt. Some conversations belonged only to the people living them. Walker finally spoke. I can't change what happened. No. Marcus agreed. But you can decide what happens the next time you stop someone. Walker slowly nodded. I will. Marcus studied his face for a moment. Leadership had taught him to recognize the difference between someone protecting their pride and someone confronting it. Walker was doing the second. Marcus extended his hand. Walker hesitated only briefly before accepting it. The handshake lasted only a few seconds. Yet every officer watching understood what it represented. Not forgiveness earned through excuses. Respect rebuilt through accountability. As they released hands, Lieutenant Harris approached. The paperwork has been corrected. Marcus nodded. Thank you. No charges have been filed. All property has been returned. The incident report will accurately reflect today's events. Marcus smiled faintly. That's all I ever wanted. He turned once more toward Walker. The purpose of authority isn't to remind people who's in control. It's to ensure everyone leaves with their dignity intact. Walker quietly repeated those words to himself, almost as though committing them to memory. Because some lessons are written in policy manuals. Others are written during the hardest day of an officer's career. And those are the lessons that remain long after the paperwork has been filed. General Marcus Johnson stepped through the station doors without hurry. The late afternoon sun bathed the parking lot in warm amber light, softening the sharp edges of patrol cars and government vehicles alike. For the first time that day, no one was giving orders. No radios crackled. No sirens echoed. Only a quiet breeze moved through the rows of parked cars. General Thomas Reed walked beside Marcus. You handled that with remarkable restraint. Marcus smiled faintly. I've learned that authority is loud only when confidence is missing. Reed nodded. I wish more leaders understood that. Behind them, Lieutenant Harris stood at the entrance with Officer Ethan Walker and Ryan Collins. None of them spoke immediately. They simply watched as Marcus reached the black government sedan waiting near the curb. Just before opening the door, Marcus stopped. He turned back. Not because anyone had called his name. Because he had one final thing to say. The officers instinctively straightened. Marcus walked back several steps until everyone could hear him. I want each of you to remember something. His voice remained calm. There will be another traffic stop. Another unfamiliar face. Another moment when the facts are incomplete. He looked directly at Walker. In that moment, you'll have a choice. You can let uncertainty create suspicion, or let professionalism create patience. No one interrupted. Marcus continued. Rank protected me today. His eyes moved across the entire station. But dignity should never depend on rank. Those words settled over the parking lot like the evening light itself. Ryan slowly nodded. Lieutenant Harris quietly removed his cap. Not as protocol, as respect. Walker finally found his voice. General. Marcus looked at him. I won't forget today. Marcus answered. Gently. I hope you don't. Not because of me, but because someone else may never have a 4-star general arriving on their behalf. Walker understood. That sentence would remain with him far longer than any disciplinary review or training seminar. General Reed opened the rear passenger door. Marcus paused one final time before entering the vehicle. He looked back at the station where the day had begun with flashing lights and uncertainty. It ended with understanding. Not perfect, not complete, but genuine. The sedan pulled away quietly. No police escort, no celebration. Just another government vehicle disappearing into Washington traffic. Officer Walker watched until it vanished from sight. Then he looked down at the small notebook he carried every shift. For the first time since graduating from the academy, he opened it and wrote something that wasn't required by department policy. Verify before you assume. He underlined it once, then closed the notebook. Years later, younger officers would ask why he always insisted on slowing down before reaching conclusions. He never told them about classified directives. He never mentioned Pentagon officials. He never spoke about the 4 stars. Instead, he always gave the same answer. Because one ordinary afternoon taught me that you never truly know the person standing on the other side of your badge. And perhaps that was the real lesson. Not that a police station had unknowingly detained a 4-star general, but that every person deserves the same measure of fairness before their story is known. Because true justice does not begin when power is revealed. It begins when dignity is offered before power is ever discovered.